Hello. In the Crown of Aragon 639 years ago, it was June 21st, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is The Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Multcara Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. Let's begin today's document. Today's document is from a Commune et Curie register from Violant. It's register 1822. It's one of the registers that I put through the OpenClaw pipeline back in, I think it was late March, maybe early April. And so I had some output to work from at the beginning. But today's episode really demonstrates how the AI tools are really still at their beginning and they're just not consistent. So sometimes I'll be able to get a really great transcription from that OpenClaw pipeline, and then other times it just conked out. Like there are two folios, so two digitized images for today's document, because it has about 20 lines on folio 153V and then about 20 lines on folio 154R. The first chunk of it was basically just given up on by Gemini. It just started to transcribe a little bit and then was like, nope, I'm done. Gemini did do more on the second folio of this, the second folio that has the second half of this document. And so Claude had more to work with, and the overall output was so much better. But there's just no real reason, it seems, that the quality of the output for folio 153V was so much worse than the quality of the output for 154R. It's really interesting to see the inconsistency. Now, this document is in Latin, and I will tell you that at the very beginning of this project in late December, I would have looked at this and just kind of given up. I would have looked at this and said, this is so complicated. There's so much going on that I'm not going to make heads or tails. It would take me 3 to 4 days of solid work in order to figure it out. Okay, maybe that's a slight exaggeration, but I mean, at least 10 hours. But with the AI tools and the practice that I've been doing with my paleography of Latin, and begrudgingly with just getting a little bit better at Latin and recognizing common Latin expressions in these documents, I was able to work on this for about an hour and get to the point, along with some additional help from Claude, I will admit, I was able to get to the point where I could understand what was going on. And I think I've got a lot of confidence in what's happening, even though there's a lot of complication in this particular document. So let me just first get out of the way a little bit of an explanation for just how I tackled this, given that the output from the OpenClaw pipeline was very dissatisfactory for folio 153V. I did my own hand transcription for folio 153V, and then I just took what had been generated from the OpenClaw pipeline for folio 154R, and I put those together into a text file and then copy pasted that into a brand new chat with Claude and said to Claude, I have a rough transcription. And so that helped me to get an understanding of what was going on in this document, because to be honest, without the AI help, I don't know that I would ever have gotten it. And the reason is that everything about this document hinges on not a line toward the beginning, like what you would usually see, but on line 17 of the document on folio 153V. So on line 17, in the middle, you have Petro again. So there's a person named Petro, or in that would be Latin, but of course I think we would, because this is a region that, is a Catalan speaking region, we would say Per or Pere, a Peter. So someone named, in English, Peter. And then right after that comes the word arnesia. And the A at the beginning of that is kind of on the more thick side of the script here in this letter. So I thought that was a name. I thought there was like a new Peter being introduced. The very beginning of the letter mentions somebody named Petro, and then the surname is Closent. Petri Closent. That's in the end of line 3. So in line... Okay, wait a second. Wait a second. That's... darn it. I gave the wrong number because the line number for what I'm looking at in line 153, in folio 153V, is in line 11. Okay, line 11, arnesia. Okay, so if you were looking in, I'm so sorry, if you were looking in line 17, and are there 17 lines on this? Anyway, it's line 11. We have Petro and then arnesia. It's like in the middle of that line. So I thought that was a surname for a different Peter. But it turns out I was wrong about that. And then if you just type in arnesia into like an online Latin dictionary, you'll get nothing. It doesn't, there is no Latin word arnesia. So that made me further think that it was a surname. But then in the chat that I did with Claude, I floated that idea and it looked increasingly unlikely. And what Claude drew my attention to is that there are terms toward the very end of the document. So this is where we have in line 15 and line 17 of folio 154R. We have in line 17, the word arnesiis. Arnesiis. It's the second to the last word in that line. And then in line 15, we have arma. So arma, that is a Latin word. Arms, weapons, something like armor. So we have something going on in this document about armor, but how did that connect to arnesia? Claude had the answer to that, and I confirmed it on the Diccionari Català Balear. Valencia Balear. Wow. All right. So sorry I'm a bit bumbly in today's episode. So I confirmed that arnes is a term for the overall, I guess a nice word to use here would be kit, the overall collection of armor and weapons for a soldier or a knight. And so what's happened in this document is that Petrus Closent had arnesia. He kit of weaponry, a collection of weapons, maybe including armor and swords. It's a term, a general term for someone's like soldierly weaponry possessions. So he had that, and it got confiscated. And the whole purpose of this document is to order the bailiff to return the arnesia, to return the arms to Petrus Closent. All right. So I went right into the content and skipped over the part that really is best to start with, which is the sourcing information. So this document is addressed to a bailiff. A bailiff of where? That was another tough thing. The place names are challenging in this document because they're rendered in Latin, and it makes it a little bit more difficult to figure out. And also because there's multiple places. So in line 4, there's this phrase, campi tarracione. You know how in almost every document we've looked at, the place name in the dating clause is Barcinone for Barcelona? Well, it kind of sounds like Tarracione in relation to Tarragona. So it's the Campi, the general region of Tarragon, and in there is a place, a town called, well, today it's called El Pla de Santa Maria, and in this document it's identified simply as Loci Sanctae Mariae de Plano. So that's confusing. And then also the bailiff is located in a different place. The bailiff that confiscated the Ghosty. Here, Ghost is mad about the confiscation. The bailiff that confiscated the weapon kit, the arnesia, I know, it's disturbing. That bailiff is in a place called Cabra. And in modern Spain, that town is Cabra del Camp, and it is about 4 kilometers north of El Pla de Santa Maria. And then those two towns are about, I think, 40 kilometers north of Tarragona. So 3 different places. And then we have this bailiff who is not named, but then there's someone else that is named that's not the bailiff, I think. And that person is like a justice or representative that has been in office there in this region for a while. Or maybe this is the bailiff. Hold on. It's like a Johannes Navarro. That's the person's name. That could be the bailiff. Or it could be someone else. It's hard to tell. So anyway, there's this jumble of names. And then, if that was not difficult enough, there is a document quoted inside this document. And then that's why we have on line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7... a dating clause in the middle. Well, the dating clause starts on line 6 at the end. Datum, and then we have Barcinona's crossed out because the scribe who is writing this is so used to writing, datum Barcinona. So it's crossed out and then replaced with gerundum. So for Girona. So it was done in October. So the document that's quoted inside was done on the 1st of October of 1386. All right. So they're referring back to an earlier complaint that was registered from when Joan and Violant were the Duke and Duchess of Girona. And so that document is signed by Johannes Navarre. And so I think that means it's not the bailiff in Cabra del Camp. So see, I'm trying to get the sourcing done, and it's It just is drawing you further in to the content. All right, let's talk about the probata for a sec. It's Père de Besant, who is a pretty frequent scribe of violants, and it's a pretty clear probata. Pedro de Besanta mandavit Domine Regina factum per Kammerlenk. So this is one that has been handled through the Chamberlain, and I do believe that the Chamberlain's name is at the end of the text block. Vidit de Ponte, that it's de Ponte who is the Chamberlain. All right. There are a couple monetary amounts mentioned, and honestly, I can't quite tell what is happening with the first monetary. It's on the second to the last line of folio 153V, where we've got centum liborum Barcinonem. So that's 100 pounds in the currency of Barcelona. And then in the middle of the part of the document on page 154R, so line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, line 10, we've got there a 500, I think that's 500 solidis, which is like a fine, and it's a pena 500 solidis, I think. And then there's a time requirement, but the time requirement is like quoted from the earlier document, so there's no time requirement for today's document. All right. One other thing to point out inside this really confusing document is that Joan is mentioned. Joan is mentioned in the beginning as a way to clarify that it was his officer who wrote the previous document. This is, in my mind, a pretty clear case of like a overlapping jurisdiction, but it's not co-rule, because here it seems like what's being done is a return to some documentation that was made in October of 1386, and it's not like Joan and Violant are talking it over. It's just that the current complaint, which is basically stemming from an earlier complaint that has not yet been resolved, that current complaint has a connection to the administration from when Joan and Violant were Duke and Duchess of Girona, and it was in Joan's jurisdiction at that time to handle this. So this is overlapping jurisdiction and not co-rule. This document, I think, is incredibly complex and does not help me all that much in my main research question. But what it does do is it gives me the chance to show my own growth in being able to sort through these documents and to use AI as a tool in order to do that. And of course, it would be nice if you could just click a button and have an AI agent just transcribe and translate this and just provide you with a nice, dependable output. But we are definitely far away from the realization of that fantasy. Maybe just a couple years from now, you'll be able to do it, but definitely not right now. It needed a lot of human in the loop. And that particular human had to have some experience with expanding certain abbreviations, had to have enough confidence to sort through some of the claims that the AI chatbot was making, and to know when to push back and to know when to accept and to know when to double check. So this is a good episode to highlight the current state of play for using large language model tools. and also the current state of play for my own understanding of the documents and the challenges of the paleography and the Latin. And I feel like now might be a good time to mention that I've made a decision to, alas, not do the entire year of the first year of the reign of Joan I and Violant de Bar. I am reaching the 6-month point, actually in the next few days. And as I'm thinking about what's ahead, there are some pretty cool documents that I know about, some really fun ones to discuss, but they number only about like a dozen or maybe 20. And so there'll be a lot of, like filler. And no historians have identified any crisis moments in the second half of the year. Like we had a crisis moment with Joan nearly dying in late April. And then the crisis moment in January of them sort of starting out their reign. There aren't really any more crisis moments. There's interesting stuff. I mean, they finally get out of Barcelona. So, every single document has been from Barcelona. And so they're establishing their reign, and also Joan's been ill. But then by October, for various reasons, they are not in Barcelona all the time. And in fact, they're in Villafranca from late October all the way until the end of January. They actually were fleeing plague, which had arrived to Barcelona, another wave of plague. But Violant before that did a pilgrimage to Montserrat, the monastery in Montserrat. So there's interesting stuff. But I did kind of like a cost benefit, kind of like pro-con, thinking through the idea of doing the second half of the year, and I realized that I've got so much material. I'll have about 182 episodes. I've got so much material already, and so adding more to it, it's kind of at the point of diminishing returns. So I've kind of arrived to a point where I feel comfortable with sort of like, I think my skills will sort of plateau. I think the problem with Claude and its new usage limits, that's just a whole other level of trouble for this project. So I made the decision that the benefits of doing the second half of the year are really not going to outweigh the costs and also the trade-off in terms of my own time, and I'd like to get to season 2, and I'm excited about that. So that's the rationale, and so the last episode is coming up. It's not too far away. So this is episode 179, and the last episode of season 1 is going to be episode 182. So I'll say more in conclusion and summary and reflection about season 1 over the next few episodes. And thank you for listening to this episode and whatever others you did of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt cara companiona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I've done my job, because remember, the motto of The Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed, and I'm really delivering on that by saying you're not getting the second half of the year, just the first 6 months. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes, and listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. In the meantime, take care.